actually now move on to our next speaker, Dr. Abhinav Mathur. He's the advisor to the board at Attero, a recycling company, and he's also the founder of Million Sparks Foundation, a non-for-profit which is focused on education initiatives. He has more than 3 decades of experience in global leadership roles and has consistent
We can skip that, maybe,
Yes. So yes, I mean, of course, you will, be talking about this, but you have a impressive, work profile, which I wanted the audience to know about. But the question to you would be, focusing specifically on EPR. One of the agenda for today's webinar is circular economy. And my question to you would be, how effective is extended producer responsibility in reducing e-waste, and what do you think are the challenges in implementing such policies?
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity. And sorry for cutting you off. I think the time was too
Absolutely
less.
not.
And
Yes.
my profile, I believe my team would have sent would be a little longer than would be required. So very quickly, I think some of our audience might not even know what EPR is, but EPR is basically extended producer responsibility. The basic principle being that if there is a corporate which is making profit from delivering certain products or services out to consumers or to customers of their own, they should be responsible for removing any waste which is getting generated from that activity. So the simplest example, if you're Bisleri, if you're Pepsi, you're selling a bottle which has your product, you make money from it. The waste which is getting generated, which is the empty plastic bottle, which gets thrown into dustbins or onto the roadside, etc., it should be your responsible, and therefore somewhere you have to own up and ensure that that gets recycled. Similarly, in the electronic waste industry, so if you're making a refrigerator, if you're making a air conditioner, which has a life of 10 years, 10 years from the time that you have sold it to the customer, therefore, logically, this would already have been obsoleted or turned into waste. At that time, the company which sold that particular product 10 years ago should be responsible for taking that and ensuring that it is recycled, and whatever sort of harmful materials are there, they do not get to impact the environment. So that's the policy which came into place in 2016 onwards. It was getting formulated, and it is now getting implemented in its spirit in the year of 2006, 18, 19. That's what has happened. Attero has been in business in 2008, so we have seen the operations when there was no EPR policy, and now we are obviously benefiting a little from that. What you need to understand, in India, this year close to 3 million tons of electronic waste is getting produced. And today, India's capacity to actually recycle that in a formal manner is less than 20%. Right? Now, without EPR, all of the electronic waste was getting recycled in the informal sector, and which is harmful, right? So most of the time, what happens that the informal sector does, it basically takes whatever products that you have given to it in form of waste. They will go and try to extract whatever materials are there inside of it with whatever sort of technologies they are aware of, right, or they know of, and these are mostly very rudimentary, extremely polluting. So for example, a copper wire has a lot of copper inside that. It's basically covered by a plastic sheath. They will basically burn it in the open, and that will cause a lot of harmful gases getting emitted in the environment. So from an environment standpoint, it is extremely bad whatever practices are done. So to extract gold, they will put a chipset or a motherboard into very, very strong acids, able to extract only 4 things from it, not all the elements which are there inside it. And whatever remains inside of that, sort of acid bath, along with whatever harmful components are there, are thrown back into the landfill, etc. So from an environmental standpoint, of course, it is extremely important that EPR kind of services are sort of implemented. The other thing it actually allows is also it basically gives certain I would say profit margins for the formal recyclers to work. So think of an informal sector worker, right? He basically collects the electronic waste from you, recycles it at the back in his backyard, right? Whereas you have to have all these formal practices, you have to pay GST and all those things, right? So so the business itself does not allow viability if there is no extra fees. By introduction of EPR, what the government has done is it has given birth to the formal recycling industry in two terms. which now has the leeway to be able to invest in R&D to ensure that less harmful technologies are getting developed. There is no external emissions which are happening. There is no water which is getting put back into the rivers and stuff like that. So the capability to invest more and more into ensuring that better technologies are existing, more recovery is happening, is coming in because of the EPR getting implemented. Now to the challenges. So there are several challenges even today. So if you look at it, India, when the CPCB came up with this particular policy in India, close to 500 odd recyclers have been given birth, right? There is a very clear written down policy with regards to how these recyclers have to be approved and given the permission to operate. But obviously, there are some mechanisms by which these guys go to a CPCB and are able to fake documents, are able to fake their capacities, technologies, etc. And so, therefore, in the ecosystem, less than 10% of these 500 odd recyclers have the right technologies, but there are certain recyclers, or rather at least registered recyclers, that basically operate a little fraudulently, where they do not do any recycling as such. They continue to pass on whatever electronic waste is back to the informal sector. But on the paper, they provide these permits and certificates to the large corporates so that they can claim that they have done recycling. So that's one. The second challenge, I believe, is that the bigger corporates, even they don't know, and they have the wherewithal to be able to audit and figure out whether the recyclers are genuine recyclers and they can do the right, correct processes in recycling, they still give it to the lower guys because they are asking them for less money to do these EPR credits, right? So that's unfortunate. Although they say that we have given it to only those people who have been a registered recycler, but that is something, they stand behind the regulation, they stand behind the CPCB. Look, you have approved these recyclers. We are giving it to only approved recyclers. So that's another challenge. The third, of course, is now there is no clear audit mechanisms which have been put in place by CPCB. And I think while there are theoretically those audit mechanisms, but I think they have to be implemented a little better. There has to be a capacity building of the CPCB and the SPCB officials themselves, so that they can basically distinguish between the right recyclers and the wrong recyclers. And there should be a responsibility at the end of the corporate itself. I think I'll conclude by that. Of course, there is a longer answer to this, but given the paucity of time, I'll just stop here, and maybe
Yes,
if there
no,
are any questions around this, I can answer them.
yes. I mean, building upon this, I will just probably ask you something that, how do you think that an effective EPR implementation can actually help with the circularity and helping the nation also build the recycling ecosystem? And why do you think it's important? If you can briefly enlighten us with your thoughts on this.
Sure. So, from a circularity standpoint, let's understand, why and what is recycling contributing. So if you look at the laptops or the phones that you are right now using to have this call, there are close to 60 elements from the periodic table. And sorry for the chemistry lesson, but there are close to 60 elements of the periodic table which are present in these devices. So there is gold, there is silver, there is platinum, there is neodymium, there is duodenum, there is lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, graphite. I could go on. It's a list of 60 elements which are there. Now, when it is going to the informal sector, now they have limited technology, right? Now, this limited technology allows them to only extract maybe a few of these metals. Gold, silver, copper is where they typically stop, maybe a little bit of iron as well. And this is where they typically stop. Now, if we continue to use informal sector practices, what will happen is that while these gold, etc., is getting extracted, the rest is getting lost forever into rivers, into landfills, etc. And these are extremely valuable resources for us. And let me explain to you what do you mean by that. Now, if you look at any technology, whether it is space tech, we already talked about semiconductors, we already talked about laptops and smartphones, etc., which are becoming very critical. But if you look at space tech, if you look at renewable energy, so we are talking about solar panels, we are talking about lithium-ion batteries, we are talking about EVs. So take any technology which you can think of in the future, even simple things like paints. Paints requires cobalt. Mental health, medicines require lithium inside of that. The same things, lithium and cobalt, go into making a battery. Now, these are very, very critical for the future in every which way. Defense technologies, right? So all of them require these critical metals. Now, if they get lost again and again in the waste stream, or even remain captured or remain in that waste stream and nobody's really extracting them, India at this point in time is totally dependent upon imports. And not only imports, but imports largely from China, which is not really a friendly country right now, right? So if we remain dependent on these, then we are done forever. And at least 20 to 30% of the sort of requirements of the country itself can come from this waste stream itself. So I'm a part of a group in NITI Aayog which is looking at how much material do you require in 2070 for India to be on a path of growth, 2047 and 2070, right?
Yeah,
Now,
the
what we
Viksit
figured
Bharat.
out, I'm so sorry.
The Viksit Bharat
Yeah,
2047.
Viksit Bharat, right? So the amount of material which is required is going to be humongous, and which will be a huge problem on the import bill. And the whole world is competing for these critical materials. The Ministry of Finance has come out with a list of 30 critical materials, and they're trying to figure out how do we ensure a resilient supply chain for us. So the circularity, if we are enabling that circularity and ensuring this recycling ecosystem gets developed, we will be less, at least much less dependent than otherwise. And the recycling ecosystem requires some profit. So we also figured out that if we were to build the recycling ecosystem to the one which could actually ensure that the waste stream is completely recycled, the amount of money which is required is huge. The government does not have the money. The current private sector does not have the money. And we can't attract that much capital into the system. The EPR ensures that there is some amount of profitability which remains with these recycling companies so that they can continue to invest and grow to the scale that India requires. And today it is 3 million tons. The next 2 years it will be 4 million tons, and probably by 2030 this will turn to close to around 7 to 8 million tons getting accumulated every year. If we don't invest into this, we are going to be sitting on a huge pile of electronic waste, which is extremely bad for the health.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think yes. So EPR is definitely building up really well.